The reason I made this channel is that I wanted to dig deep and cover the couch co-op games that not everyone else is talking about. So today, we're doing Couch Co-op Hidden Gems, Part 2. The first game I want to talk about is called Machine Hunter. When this game first came out in 1997, it was often described as a blatant, loaded ripoff. And that's not completely wrong. It has the over-the-top violence, the dramatic lighting, and the top-down run-and-gun shooting gameplay. But there are a few things that set it apart. This game has twin-stick shooter controls, and that's always a nice benefit when playing a top-down shooter. Also, when playing in two-player co-op, you can play it split screen, so you're not stuck to a single screen. You can split up and take on all the enemies and clear the rooms a lot faster. That's definitely a bonus. The other cool addition is that there are machines that you can take control of to get some added firepower. I'm not going to say that this game is perfect. It definitely has its flaws. Everything kind of looks the same and it becomes a bit monotonous. But in 2024, how many people actually even know about the game Loaded? There's numerous top-down shooters. So when you play Machine Hunter, Loaded probably isn't even going to come across your mind. So I think with the space from the release, it can kind of stand on its own at this point. Anyway, this game has its flaws, but it's one that I never hear people talk about, so I just wanted to mention it. Charge and Blast on the Sega Dreamcast. This is a game that I totally missed when I was digging deep into the co-op library. It's a Cabal shooter, which is a game inspired by Cabal, which is an early third-person shooter. But the main gimmick is you control your character and the cursor separately, and the camera's behind you. So you gotta do a little bit of multitasking. You dodge the bullets coming towards you, and you gotta move the cursor around. But this is one that really elevates the concept. It has a futuristic setting. You're now playing as robots instead of soldiers. And the graphics are pretty nice for the time. Honestly, when it comes to Cabal shooters, Charge and Blast is probably one of the best ones. The only other one that I think of that beats it is probably Sin and Punishment. Rolan's Curse is kind of a Zelda clone, and it came out on the Game Boy. I love covering co-op Game Boy games because not a lot of people do that. And I think that's just because a lot of these games went under people's radar, as you needed 2 Game Boys and 2 copies of the game, as well as a link cable. So that barrier to entry definitely prevented everyone from trying this in co-op. And it's a shame because this game's pretty cool. It might be the earliest example of a co-op Zelda-like, although the gameplay is a bit more simplified, and it's a little bit more linear. But that being said, I still think it's one of the best co-op games on the Game Boy, so give it a try. It's easier than ever to be able to emulate link cable support for the Game Boy. You can even do it on one computer, where you're emulating 2 Game Boys at the same time and having them link, so you could play the game in split screen. This is definitely the most convenient way of trying this out. Space Raiders is a modern take on Space Invaders. It came out on the GameCube and the PS2. It goes to show that solid gameplay is just timeless, as this game has a fresh coat of paint and some updates, but the core gameplay of Space Invaders is still there, and all those years later, it's still just a really solid experience. One of the updates is now it's kind of like a third-person shooter, so the camera's behind you. Even though the perspective is a little bit different, it gives the illusion of it coming from above, just like Space Invaders, and you can play it in 2-player co-op. Amok is a 1996 mech-themed action game that came out on the Sega Saturn as well as the PC. It's kind of like a mix between Mech Assault and Twisted Metal. The gameplay is pretty similar to a vehicle combat type of game, and you can play it in split-screen co-op. Each level you have different objectives, and I like that between levels your mech changes forms. So sometimes it's like a submarine swimming around underwater, and then other times your mech has legs and you are running around on the ground, kind of like the walker in Star Fox. The graphics are really solid for the time. 3D graphics were not always the Sega Saturn's strong suit, but looking here, it pulls it off really well. There's also a split-screen deathmatch mode. When talking about co-op Sega Saturn games, Amok is definitely not one that gets mentioned very often, so I wanted to bring some light to it. Ruin Arm is a game that came out exclusively for the Super Famicom in Japan. Unfortunately, at the time of recording this, there is yet to be an English translation. You still have to play this game with Japanese, and there is quite the language barrier here. That is a big deterrent from picking this one up and playing it. However, it's a pretty solid action RPG, similar to Secret of Mana, and you can play it in co-op. However, I did struggle a bit in the menus trying to figure out how to add the second player, but once you figure that out, it should be smooth sailing, until you need to read Japanese. Nonetheless, this is another one that just went under my radar for years, and I just recently found out about it. I'm a huge fan of co-op action RPGs, and there's definitely just not enough of them. I was happy to add this one to the list. Raging Blade is a 3D hack-and-slash beat-em-up that came out on the PlayStation 2 in the year 2002. There are 4 playable characters. There's a monk, a knight, barbarian, and a magician. So it kind of brings back some memories of the D&D beat-em-ups or Golden Axe or something like that. And I feel like that's a good comparison, as those were also hack-and-slash beat-em-ups. So if you like your beat-em-ups with fantasy and magic and swords and slashing and Raging Blade should be right up your alley. And this one never came out in the US. It's only in Japan and Europe, so I think that's the main reason people missed this one, but I recommend it. Just when I thought I knew about every single co-op game on the original Xbox, I find another one. Xyanide is a 3D shoot 'em up, and it went totally under my radar. The story is about this kid that goes to space and then gets impaled by this thing and turns into a skeleton and explodes, and then for some reason you start flying spaceships. That's what I gathered, at least from the opening cutscene. But the gameplay is pretty unique for a shoot 'em up, as it's a twin-stick shooter, and I think this works really well. The viewing angle and backgrounds are constantly changing, so sometimes the camera's from behind, sometimes you're moving horizontally, and sometimes you're moving vertically. But the gameplay remains the same with twin-stick controls. I just felt like the perspective changes and the 3D visuals were a unique touch for a 3D shoot 'em up, especially for this time. The game came out in 2006, and it's described as a 3D interpretation of the 2D side-scrolling shoot-'em-up genre. When it first came out, it was met with somewhat lukewarm reviews. But a lot of times, I think that when you look back at these games, you realize they were actually pretty unique and doing something that other games weren't doing at the time. So maybe they were ahead of their time. And I feel like that's kind of the case here. It's not the best shoot-'em-up ever, but with the visuals, it really stands out. Anyway, this is a shoot-'em-up that is often ignored, and it really stands out from the crowd. Mystic Formula on the PC Engine CD, exclusively in Japan. That system is already pretty obscure, so pretty much anything on that could be considered a hidden gem. But this is one that doesn't really get talked about a lot. It's a pretty straightforward run-and-gun shooter. You can pick between 4 different anime-style characters. Unfortunately, the visuals in the game are a lot more simplified. They don't really have that same cartoonish art style. So the visuals are not its strong suit, and the gameplay itself, it's a little bit monotonous. There's some pretty cool boss battles here, and there are a couple levels where you can jump on a motorcycle type of thing to change up the gameplay a little bit more and give you some added firepower. This is not one of the best run and gun shooters, but it's just one that doesn't get mentioned a lot. So I still recommend you try it if you're a fan of the genre. The last game I wanted to talk about is called Dirty Pair Project Eden, and it came out exclusively on the Famicom disk system in Japan. This is another one that I just completely missed. I thought I dug deep into the Famicom and disk system library, but then, after doing some more research, I find another co-op game just hidden in that library. And this one's pretty cool. It's a 2D run-and-gun platformer with auto-scrolling levels. And then there's parts where you can jump in and fly this spaceship. One player pilots and the other player sits in the back, and you have double firepower. So that's pretty cool. And it's based off of an anime by the same name that I've never seen or even heard about. When you get past all of the stage 1 stages and get to stage 2, then the game turns into almost like an adventure game where you're going in and out of doors. There's a little bit more exploration. You're going to pick up items, and it kind of looks like Xenophobe. I'm recommending this game with a huge grain of salt because it's incredibly difficult. You have 1-hit kills. Oh, and did I mention when playing it in 2-player, if one of you gets hit, you both lose and have to start the whole level over. This is just terrible game design, especially for co-op. This should never be in any game. At least you have unlimited continues, so when you die, you can try over and over again, but you gotta start the whole level over. At least there's a save function, and in the later levels when you die, you just start from the same room. I have never been able to get that far in a 2-player game though, as playing this with my 6-year-old daughter was very difficult. But I've never heard anyone really talk about this game, and if you have the patience and a really skilled partner, I think this game offers enough variety and unique gameplay to make it worth trying out at least once. But definitely, you're gonna need some patience, as it's very difficult. So there are 10 more co-op hidden gems. What are some of your favorites? Let me know in the comments. And check out our part 1 of Co-op Hidden Gems, where we talked about 10 other games. Thank you for watching.